Hello there, welcome to the PlugBox Podcast, where we discuss all things EV and renewables and generally have a damn good chinwag. Anyway, on with the show.
Good evening, Mr. Pete.
Hello there.
Hello, and welcome everybody to episode 11 of the PlugBox Podcast. Hope you're all keeping well. Pete, we've got some more subjects today, I think, haven't we?
What's on the list?
Oh, you see,
There's
my list
always a
today
list.
has been... There is always a list, but it's not been the best of days today, and my list is a little bit ill-prepared, but nonetheless, there is a list. Today, we're going to talk about Ford. So last week, they launched the F-150 Lightning, and there's been some more exciting news from them about their future plans for electrical vehicle domination. So we'll come on to that a little bit later. There's also an interesting video that I haven't seen, I confess, but I know, Pete, you're interested to talk about it. It's from Engineering Explained about a car traveling 1,000 miles in a single day. So again, we'll move on to that shortly. But I think we're going to start initially with Shell and the court ruling in the Netherlands. Interesting one, yeah? What's your take on
definitely.
it, Pete?
Yeah, so I don't remember the court ruling exactly, but basically the court has, in the Netherlands at least, has ruled that Shell need to do more quickly. So I think, is it reduce emissions by, I think, 45% or something like this, whereas Shell's previous plan was 25%. And it's not just operational emissions, which is a bit of a get-out clause for big oil, but it's also emissions pertaining to their products, which, as we well know, Royal Dutch Shell sell a fair few litres of petrol. So
yeah, the odd pint here or there.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great ruling in the sense of the being instructed to do more. My only concern is, I'm not sure if they're going to appeal it or not, but how that's actually implemented. And it kind of, if they're forced to do it, is that a good thing that they mean suddenly, they start throwing wind turbines and solar farms up all over the shop? Or does it mean that if they restrict the products they're allowed to sell and it puts the business in a worse place, does that mean actually what they're already doing currently to roll out renewables is slowed somewhat? So it'll be interesting to see how the ruling's actually implemented and what happens.
Yeah, so that's correct, Pete. The court in the Netherlands has ruled in what's being described as a landmark case that the oil giant Shell must reduce its emissions. And we're talking, as you rightly say, 45%, so compared to the levels from 2019. So it's been judged that Shell is still causing dangerous climate change and must now stop it quickly. So there's no indication yet on whether or not they'll appeal. My guess is they will, because honestly, are they really alone in all of this? I can't believe that it's just Shell that's causing a problem. There must be other petrochemicals, even within that industry alone. There must be other companies. But could be an interesting one to watch. Do we know how long they've got to?
The whole... No, that's what I say. I don't know how it's actually going to be implemented. The 29 thing is an interesting one because normally it's done from a point in time some while ago, which maybe gives you some head start, or you've already sandbagged some improvements. So the 2019 thing is an interesting one, but yeah, how it will actually be implemented, I'm not so sure, because they're not going to just stop selling products. So does it mean they're going to do offsetting projects or what? Because offsetting is questionable at the best of times, when it comes to scale. But for them to reduce their emissions substantially, I should say 45%, either they need to stop selling hydrocarbon products that make CO2, or they need to offset it or capture it in a major way. Yeah, and to offset it or capture it in a major way. But I don't know how, even with the amount of capex that Shell no doubt have, and with the best will in the world, I don't know how they would do that in a relatively short space of time. So, yeah, how it's actually going to be implemented, I'm not sure. But it is right that finally authorities are getting on board with the fact that it is quite a small group of companies that are making the biggest impact on the planet.
But as I said, Shell are by no means alone. There are other petrochemical companies that are equally biggest contributor, even if there aren't that many of them. So it's still quite early days since this ruling. I think, literally, I think it was yesterday that they made this ruling. So it's yet to be understood in more details about how this is going to manifest itself. And that actually leads me on to a subject that we'll talk about a little bit later with VAT here in the UK. I know you're keen to have a rant on that, but we'll save that for later.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing for me is, as I say, is one, how it's globally implemented, but also, as much as a lot of people won't like it, big oil are part of the solution, because no doubt some, I'm particularly thinking of American brands, will stick to the guns and stick just being oil companies. But certainly in Europe, the likes of Royal Dutch Shell and BP and Total in France, they don't call themselves oil companies anymore. They call themselves energy companies. And if they're really serious about that and they're already investing heavily in renewables, then, as I say, as much as people might not like it, they are rich companies, and they will be part of the solution as much as they've created part of the problem.
Correct. Yeah, they have indeed. What's your prediction on what might happen? I certainly think they'll appeal, but how successful they are in that, I remains to be seen.
Yeah, again, it's a catch-22, isn't it? I think part of it is, they will be instructed, no doubt, by their lawyers to appeal it, because they don't want all these cases coming up all over the world, with them being sued or whatnot for various climate crimes. But at the same time, from a PR point of view, especially as Shell have already announced, wanting to go to net zero somehow. I'm not sure how that works for an oil company, but they've already announced it. But from a PR point of view, how bad would it look for them to appeal against a ruling which basically says you need to reduce your carbon emissions, which they've already said they're going to do? So again, another catch-22 really is, I'm sure from a legal standpoint, the right thing to do, air quotes, right thing to do is to appeal it. But from a PR point of view and an ethical point of view, it's just need to take it on the chin and do something about it.
Correct, but they might just challenge how ambitious the ruling is. They might ask for some
perhaps
dispensation on what can be achieved by when realistically. Okay, so coming up in a bit, we'll talk about the VAT change here in the UK, which has got Peter all riled, as you can hear. But before we get onto that, let's talk about driving 1,000 miles in one day.
Yeah, so
where's this story come from, Pete?
So Engineering Explained. So Jason over at Engineering Explained, for those that aren't aware, Engineering Explained is kind of what it says on a tin. It's quite a nerdy guy that often, he's a bit of a tinkerer, but often stands at a whiteboard with some different coloured dry wipe pens and explains, well, engineering. And most
I wonder
of it
where he got the name from.
Very inventive. But it is quite good, and he's got, I think, 3 or 4 million subscribers, so he's done really well for himself. And as much as he's a bit of an oddball, a bit nerdy, his content is genuinely interesting if you're that way inclined. So definitely worth checking out his channel. But I think for the best part of 2 years now, maybe a little bit less, he's had a Tesla Model 3 performance, which obviously he's used to create content for his channel. I don't think, and he explains in the video, he was expecting to keep it so long. He just wanted it kind of to investigate it
Almost
because
an
he's always had kind
experiment.
of exactly, yeah, and no doubt again for content creation because he always had kind of oddball cars. So I think he has like a Mazda Miata or MX-5 as we know it in Europe, and a Subaru. I think it's Outback. I think it's called, or Crosstrek maybe. And the Honda S2000. So he has some funky combustion
So
cars.
he likes his cars then. Okay.
Yes. But this particular video was him seeing whether it was possible in the normal world, so not hypermiling or anything like that, just the normal world, to drive 1,000 miles in an EV in one day. And again, it was a real world thing. So it wasn't let's drive continuously from, 12 in the morning to 12 the next morning. It was, a day of driving. So as I say, go check the video. But he was basically driving to LA from where he lives. And in, I think, 16 and a half hours, he drove 973 miles. And it's not that he ran out of range. It's just that he got to his hotel and didn't want to just drive around the block to prove a point. So he basically drove 1,000 miles in a day. And as I say, if you go check the video
in
out,
a real world scenario. So I haven't seen the video, I confess, but air conditioning on and all of the usual. Was he traveling at freeway speeds? He wasn't.
So that's the really interesting
trying.
thing. Over 16 and a half hours, he averaged 59 miles an hour. And that 59 miles an hour includes average speed of 59 miles an hour, includes the time of the 3 charging stops. So you can tell right away that yes, he was actually traveling at US highway speeds of whatever, 75, 80 miles an hour. And in his total, I think around 16 and a half hours of driving, he stopped to charge 3 times. And I think his approximate charge time was about 2.5 hours. So out of 16 and a half hours of driving, he spent 2.5 hours of that charging, which I don't think is at all unreasonable to stop 2.5 out of 16 and a half hours and to cover, as I say, basically 1,000 miles in a day. So, obviously in the UK and much of Europe, you can't really drive 1,000 miles without ending up in some water. But
in the UK, you simply don't need to. No, there isn't 1,000 miles journey in the UK.
No, as I say, you'll end up in some water if you try and drive that far. But obviously, predominantly his audience is no doubt in the US, and of course they always like say, yeah, but what happens if I want to do a road trip or a cross country journey? And it's just like, the guy drove pretty much 1,000 miles, asterisk 973, in a day, 16 and a half hours, and out of that he spent 2.5 of it charging. So that's not at all unreasonable. As I say, his average speed across all of that was 59 miles an hour, which again, he's not slow. He was driving normally. And I think how he put it in the video is for every 6 minutes of driving, he spent 1 minute charging. So an interesting way to think about it.
Yes.
And I think he did just over, I think it was maybe 320 watt hours per mile. So, I mean, obviously Tesla did the smart thing when they first started rolling out vehicles. They also started rolling out national infrastructure, which gives them the kind of walled garden.
Yeah. People buy their cars for that charge network.
Yeah, and he's in kind of the west coast of the US where they've got a lot of market penetration and a lot of superchargers, etc., etc. But nonetheless, I don't know how anyone can say, an EV can't go far enough. Like the guy drove 1,000 miles in a day, and out of the 60 and a half hour journey time, 2.5 of that was spent charging,
making a coffee, going to the bathroom.
Exactly. So, he was if you're a truck driver or driving for work, legally you need to stop probably more than that anyway. And again, if you're on a road trip, your bladder has got a certain service life. You need to have some time out to kind of relax and switch off for a bit and refocus. And as you say, grab a coffee, use the bathroom, etc., etc. So, as much as range on vehicles are going to increase, it's. I think it proves a point that you can actually use EVs for road trips and long journeys, just as you can with gas cars or internal combustion cars. But it's a really interesting video, and you should definitely go check it out.
Does he go into the financials of it at all, Pete?
Yeah, so that was quite interesting, actually, because he went into the cost of doing it versus kind of a car that would average 30 miles per gallon. And it worked out roughly equal. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but, he was using figures like $3 a gallon. So, of course, in the US, petrol is really cheap. So if you were to compare his costs for that journey versus a car that averaged 30 miles per gallon, then it worked out roughly the same. However, that was based on a super low gas price or petrol price. I think maybe $3 a gallon. And he said, well, actually, if you were to do it in kind of a big truck or a performance car where maybe you use premium gas, that's $4 a gallon and does maybe 20 miles per gallon, then you'd automatically be spending more. And of course, if we hop across the pond, as it were, $3 or $4 a gallon is pretty much the price. We pay $3 or $4 a litre
for a
close
litre.
Enough.
Yes.
Yeah. I think in the UK now it's like maybe £1.30-ish for a litre.
It's interesting that you say that. I genuinely don't know or follow the price of what we call petrol in the UK, but gas, simply don't know. That I haven't been to a petrol station now for a long time.
Yeah, no, the same. But whatever a gallon is, was it 4.5 litres, 5 litres? So you're probably talking equivalent, maybe $11 or $12 a gallon. So at which point, even though you're using public charging, which you pay a premium for compared to your household electric, it's much cheaper. I think the only caveat would be if you were to use Ionity, which is just silly expensive. But nonetheless, the video is really interesting. As I say, it just proves that you can drive those, once or twice yearly journeys in the real world without too much of an issue. So, and it's only going to get better.
So EVs are viable. EVs are viable. Admittedly, we have to put a small disclaimer there. That's using the Tesla charge network, which we know to be very reliable and very widespread. But it's only going to get better as more charging stations become available. All right, still to come is your rant, I think, on VAT here in the UK, but we'll save that till last because I know you're gonna go on a bit about that. But let's talk about Ford first. So, Lightning was announced last week. They've had a few orders, Pete.
They've got a lot of good press, haven't they?
I think we call it press penetration, actually, and they've had some deep penetration in the press this week. They've had news all over the show. 70,000 customer reservations, which I think is justified. It's really quite an inspiring product. And a lot of journalists have called it pivotal in the transition to electric vehicles because this car is like a culture in the States, isn't it? The F-150.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important part. So again, because I'm super busy, I was watching another American YouTuber the other day, Doug DeMuro, who does a lot of car reviews, and he was kind of doing a piece to camera about this because, of course, you can't look and touch and feel a car yet. But he was talking about it, and he made a really good point that, the Tesla Cybertruck and the Rivian, maybe less so with the Rivian, but, they're from companies that people don't, average Americans don't really know or understand or really care for. But when you think of an F-150 buyer in Idaho or Montana and Ford say, yeah, we're making electric, then their ears prick up and they pay attention just because of the fact that it's Ford. So, yeah, I think it's a pivotal moment.
People in the States don't buy a pickup truck or a car. They buy a Ford F-150. That's just the go-to product. So to change it and make it not quite price even, but getting pretty close to it. I think it's a really big step. But this came, I think, at a time that Ford are starting to tell us a little bit more about their direction moving forward. So they're talking about expectations of 40% of their global sales to be electric by 2030, which is substantial.
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to it. One, which is kind of the bright hope of the situation, which is, I think, genuinely now the big three in the US are kind of waking up and smelling the coffee, as it were, about switching to electrification. But also they're seeing that the current administration are really hot on it. And I think even today I was reading that maybe the tax credit's going to be $12,500. So they want to buy into that. They see that maybe the administration are going to either give some subsidies or some investment, green investment, that is. But yeah, no, at least from a Ford point of view, the CEO, Jim Farley, seems to be quite hot on electrification. I think has made some announcement in the last few days about other Ford products. So the Explorer, which is kind of a full-size SUV, three-row SUV in the US. The Lincoln, I think, is it Navigator? Which again is a three-row full-size SUV. Kind of their luxury brand will be EV, and then even some mutterings about the new. It's not out yet, I don't think, really. I think it's been announced and shown, but customer cars aren't around. But some mutterings about an electric Bronco, which would be a very cool car.
Oh, kitsch retro with an EV platform, fabulous.
Yep, and the same market as the Jeep Magneto that we talked about in podcast past.
I saw an article also about Jeep this week that their plug-in hybrid to lease in the States is currently cheaper than the gas equivalent.
That's interesting.
I guess that they are. Yeah, I think it's down to probably necessity to shift stock, or they've built in batch and they want to get rid of them, or maybe they're getting some credits from somewhere. But yeah, I heard a couple of news stories about that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not a big fan of hybrids, but it's better than the pure gas.
Oh, it's a terrible name as well, 4xe. It's like 4xe.
Yeah, that's the one. Yes, thank you.
It's just the Renegade 4xe, but yeah, it's interesting you say credits, because I think Stellantis, which now kind of own or is the holding company, whatever, for FCA in the States and PSA Group, Peugeot Citroën here in Europe, I think have said that their agreement or relationship with Tesla is going to come to a conclusion sooner than it otherwise would have done. So, yeah, maybe, as you say, they're giving them away to prevent them having to buy credits, certainly in the US. If they can shift some PHEVs, then maybe it means that they don't have to give Elon some money.
Correct. And if it does just happen to make a few people transition to at least a partially electric vehicle so they understand the merits, then great. I personally don't see the need for people to do that. I think it's, as we've just said, it's very viable to move to pure electric without too much inconvenience at all. So anyway, it's a step in the right direction, even if it's only short term. So yeah, Ford doing big things and heading in the right direction as well in terms of their electric plans. But I think the only thing that we've got left on our magical list to cover is something you want to rant about, Pete. What's going on with VAT?
Oh, We never want to talk about politics on this program, but podcast, should I say? But there is something particularly dastardly about the current UK government on one hand voicing to the world that they want to lead climate policy and the green transition and build back better and hosting COP in Glasgow and all this sort of stuff, and on the other what they actually do in practice. So I'm not sure if we talked about it before on the podcast, maybe not, but there was a bit of furore some months ago because they went from charging 5% to 20% on solar panels and battery storage. And,
Correct.
They tried to blame it on the EU and this, that, and the other, which, again, let's not go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, this week there's been a couple of charge point networks, particularly Instavolt, that are saying now some HMRC direction says that certainly in the UK, electricity at home is only charged at 5% value added tax,
and
so
yet,
kind of a lower rate. And yet now they're saying for public charge point operators they must charge 20%. Which
just why? I just don't get this. Where's the logic?
There's some people on the other side of the aisle that say, yeah, but petrol and diesel have 20% VAT and they have fuel duty, so there should be parity. And I understand that point. I don't agree with it because fundamentally there has to be, to kind of quote Elon, a forcing function. So during a transition, you have to provoke behavioural change, and to on one hand saying we're going to ban ICE cars and you have to buy a new EV and you should buy a new EV, and then to say actually we're going to make it even more expensive. And I think one of the things I mentioned to you before we jumped on the podcast was, again, this raises the barrier to entry, not just because it might make public charging more expensive, but for those people that aren't affluent enough to own a driveway where you can charge at home and they're reliant on the public network, then they're going to be penalised above and beyond people that have a driveway. And it just seems crackers. And similar to the solar panel and the battery storage VAT rise, the common theme was solid fuels, so coal. If you were to buy a lump of coal, you only pay 5% VAT. So again, you've got the government saying we want to lead the world on climate policy and build back better and the green revolution, but why are you charging 5% VAT on fossils and 20% on generally public charge point networks use or buy renewable electricity? And it's just completely the wrong message. And again, penalising the wrong people. Like, we know HMRC, the tax man in the UK, is losing money because vehicles are getting more efficient. The market share for EVs is growing. People are driving less. So fuel duty revenue is going down. So again, a forcing function to change behaviour. Why not raise fuel duty? Fuel duty has been flat now for the best part of 10 years, I think. And it's always, but again, it hurts low-income families. And again, perfectly valid argument. I don't particularly agree with it. But, if you want to get people out of petrol cars and into EVs, you basically, help them to do so. But yeah, anyway, sorry, rant somewhat.
What you've described
over.
at the latter part of that conversation is essentially, I think, what Norway has done. They tax anything dirty to the point where they can then help the people to buy something clean. And we all know that, let's cut to the chase, Norway is leading the world when it comes to adoption of certainly electric vehicles, but probably clean renewable energy as well. And it's working there. So I just don't get this either. It doesn't make logical sense to me. The only thing I can think of, and maybe playing devil's advocate and in no way supportive of this whatsoever, is could it be that they are putting the VAT on it to essentially tax the wealthier, earlier adopters so that they can improve the charging network?
I mean, to be fair, I can't speak for previous years, but certainly for the last 2 years, they've already been taxing wealthier EV adopters because road tax changed from being purely CO2 based to being value based. And if the purchase price of the vehicle, including options, was over £40,000, not only do you pay the, I think, flat rate of £145 a year, you also have to pay a supplement of, I think, £310 a year. So, most EVs are over £40,000 currently and have been certainly for the last few years. We'd like to see that drop, but most EVs are already over £40,000. So EV drivers, as you say, affluent early adopters, are already being taxed by way of this value subsidy. So, again, someone buying a brand new Ford Fiesta for 15,000, 16,000 doesn't pay this. Whereas someone buying a spec Tesla Model 3 or Hyundai Kona does. So, they're already being charged. I think there's a lot of discussion about how fuel duty will have to change to a kind of a true kind of road tax, where you basically get charged per mile used. And that's how it's going to have to go, because it just seems crackers how if I plug my car in at home, I pay 5% VAT. But if I go down the road and plug it in at a public station, I pay 20% VAT. And it's just like, it's the same electrons. How can you, it's like saying if I were to buy a can of beer from Tesco, or the supermarkets are available, I pay 5% VAT on it. But if I buy it from a pub, I pay 20% VAT on it. And, the big public outcry, how can you charge a different tax rate on the same product just because of location? It's just utterly crackers. And I say that the bigger macro image is the government saying one thing about climate policy, but then in practice doing something completely different.
Yeah. Very frustrating.
Yeah, and I don't think it's too. I mentioned Instavolt was kind of one of the charge networks that put out a statement saying that they'd been charging 5%, and now they're going to have to move to 20%. And as much as Instavolt are lauded as the best network and come out the best or number one in consumer surveys because of how reliable the network is, you just tap your credit card and it works, but you pay a premium for that. It's 35 pence a kilowatt hour, and I think now
40p,
which is a lot, and it pains me to say, but you could roughly work the maths out for a very efficient diesel car and say, actually, it's about the same. And I just hate that argument, because that's not the point. We used to say that with Ionity, because I think Ionity is some crazy 60-some pence a kilowatt hour, at which point it is cheaper to drive a petrol or a diesel car. But I think that's the point, is Ionity want you to be part of their club where you get a significantly lower rate. But again, nonetheless, it's like 40 pence a kilowatt hour, which is, I think, similar to what Shell charge. I think Shell currently charge 41 pence a kilowatt hour, which again, to me, is just is absurd. You know what I mean? I kind of buy the argument of premium petrol, but there's no such thing as a premium electron.
It's 8 times the price what I pay during my cheap rate at home. 8 times.
And obviously, BP Pulse, if you remember, I think it's whatever it is it £7 or £8 a month to get the little card? Then it's 15 pence a kilowatt hour for rapid chargers. So, you pay nearly 3 times more for an equivalent rapid public rapid charge than you are with BP. So, yeah, I kind of feel bad, because it's not good for Instavolt. I would honestly, for 5 pence, maybe they should have just absorbed the cost, because 35 pence was already pretty pricey. But
Yes.
I don't know. Obviously, they have to recoup their
So
investment. But yeah,
is this going to make you change where you go for your charge now, Pete?
I mean, obviously, we talked about in the last few podcasts about me having currently a Renault Zoe through Onto, so I already have a charge card. So it won't kind of change my behaviour in the sense of I have a charge card now for Instavolt, for Shell, and for Pulse. But I think certainly when I go back to having my own EV, if I get a card for Pulse and it costs me 15 pence a kilowatt hour, I'd probably go out of my way to charge at a Pulse station for 15 pence rather than go to an Instavolt one and pay 40 pence.
Yes.
It's a big old difference. I mean, like,
it's almost like it's fallen over the threshold now, isn't it? 35p you can just about stomach, but over 40p you're thinking, really?
Yeah,
shame.
But anyway, not to get into the politics of it, but from a policy point of view, it's completely unintelligible as to why they would do it. There is no reason. You know what I mean? It's not going to create a significant revenue as of today for the Treasury to go from 5% to 15%, and it's just completely the wrong messaging compared to this green revolution, build back better, climate leaders narrative that they're trying to portray. But again, in practice, it's something completely different. And yes, why are we not putting coal up to 20% or more?
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, rant over for this week. But it's just crackers, and it's the wrong message.
Absolutely, yeah. But you did touch upon something I do want to ask you about. How's the love affair with the Zoe going?
Oh, it's good, you know. So over about, I think, 700 or 800 miles now, I've averaged about 4 miles per kilowatt. So it's an efficient little thing, even with me in it. And I've done a lot of motorway journeys and whatnot. It charges okay. I mean, it charges, it only goes up to 50 kilowatts. So that's a feature of the kind of little facelift ZE50 that it's now got DC charging rather than just AC. But the big one I've noticed was where I live now, the Tesco down the road's now got some pod point chargers at it. And it's got a 22 kilowatt post. And charging at 22 kilowatt AC is a bit of a game changer, honestly speaking, because as much as I've used the 7 kilowatt posts before the pod point ones that are kind of in partnership with Volkswagen at Tesco locations, you'll get a few miles doing a shop. But when you've got 22 kilowatts and you spend 30, 40 minutes doing your weekly shop, you get a significant amount of range, and it's free. So
when was the last time you actually paid for an Electron?
Well, not since I've got the Zoe. Not since. I think I paid once. I think I went to the new rugby services. So for those not aware, there's kind of a deal between GridServe and Ecotricity. And for the first time in a number of years, a brand new service station was built at Junction 1 on the M6. So when you go up the M1 and it meets the M6, there's a new services at Rugby. And between GridServe and Ecotricity, they've installed, I think it's 15. I think the 350 kilowatt chargers.
Ooh,
I think that's
fast.
right. Anyway, not that the Zoe can take it, but I went there just for a bit of a nosy and a sausage roll from Greg's, as you do, just to have a bit of a snoop. But I think other than that, that's the only time I've paid, because as I mentioned earlier, you get the charge cards included for Shell, Pulse, BP Pulse, and now Instavolt as well. So I don't even have to go out of my way to select a particular network between those three. Any town, city, service area, you're pretty well covered. So yeah, I've not paid for an Electron for pretty much since I got the Zoe to start with. So it's a great little car, you know what I mean? And going back to the 22 kilowatt AC, that most electric cars don't have it, and even if they do, you generally have to pay for it as an option. So to have it as standard, it's really a good feature. I think it's mainly because in the French market they have a lot of 22 kilowatt posts kicking about. So at least we have something to thank the French for. But no, it's a really good feature, and it's a good little car. So I'll have to see how long I keep it for.
I can just see the enthusiasm growing week on week, Pete, for that little car.
I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but Renault's kind of mark is small, affordable city cars, and that's exactly what the Zoe is. There's some features and some niceties mission, of course, but you got to think about the price point of the car. But actually, a lot of the features that you do want, it's a relatively nice place to sit. It does 200 miles in the real world, which is more than enough for what is effectively a city car. As I said, it charges quite quick on either AC or DC. I fit a lot of stuff in it, so I'm not quite sure what more people want, really.
It has a nice welcome chime.
Oh, a lovely welcome chime, yeah. Nice little LEDs that bathe the interior in white lights. But as long as you're happy in a small car, I don't know, other than an armrest, I kind of fall into the middle of the car every time I flop into it. But as I said, if you're happy with a small car and you're not snobbish about wanting to drive around in something bigger as a status symbol, then I don't know what more you would really want from a car than a Zoe.
A Zoe, but packaged in a Renault 5 classic remake, redesign, which is something that they have teased from Renault side. So that could be fun.
No, a Renault 16.
Wasn't it a Renault 5 Turbo? I think they had a concept.
Yeah, but I'm not saying, do you not think that the Renault 16 looks better?
I don't think I've seen it.
Am I testing your Renault knowledge now? It's a really nasty car from the 90s. So anyway, the Renault 5 thing looked cool. The only reason why I mention it is there was an article the other day about some 95, 96-year-old woman that had surrendered a driving license and was going to scrap a Renault 16 car. W Reg, if anyone knows UK Regs quite well, so it's quite an old car. But yes, someone went and picked it up, and it was this, as I say, 90s Renault, which was very plasticky and very 90s, but it was mint.
Couple of hundred miles.
It was this little, little old deer, bless her, that had its inch new, and it was, it was pretty much mint. And as you say, it had been driven, the supermarket and back, and that's about it. So, anyway, a bit of a Renault tangent, but yeah, Renault under Luca de Mea and the whole Renault-lution, which we talked about in podcast past, that's on the YouTubes, seem to be wanting to go through their back catalogue of well appreciated now retro cars and kind of EV them up, and
the
best of luck
Renault
to them, really.
5 Turbo from back in the day in a new dress would look fantastic. I think that wraps it up, doesn't it, Pete?
I think so.
Another week.
Bedtime, Pete.
Well, yeah, maybe episode 11 though. That's we're well into double digits now.
That's it. Another week, another PlugBox podcast.
Yeah, they're all on YouTube, so do go back and look. There's still a lot of relevant news on there. You can catch up previous episodes and helps out with like and subscribe as usual. Should we finish there then?
Cool. Cheers, Pete.
Cheers. Take care. Bye now.